Welcome to Max and Stacy Report. I'm Max Keiser with Stacy Herbert, coming to you from El Salvador, land of the free, home of the Bitcoin. Speaking of El Salvador, so much going on around the world. Stacy.
Hey, Max, we're going to talk about true independence because we recently celebrated the True Independence Day here on September 15th. And of course, that evening, we saw President Bukele announce that he will be running for re-election in 2024. But when we talk about true independence, and in his speech to announce that he was going to run for re-election, what we saw was that he mentioned peace, he mentioned sovereignty, he mentioned independence. He mentioned these foundational sort of Enlightenment ideas of the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness or property. So we're going to look at the fiat world that we're replacing and what you're seeing, this epochal shift during this deglobalization and de-dollarization period as we move from basically a world we've known for 50, 60 years of all fiat and a US empire, and how that's disappearing, and the end of the fiat fraud and what that looks like, i.e. when you don't have true independence, when you don't have real money, when you don't have free money, and you can't have economic freedom or economic liberty. And that is what we see happening in Lebanon as an example of what we could have had here instead in El Salvador. And that is, banks in Lebanon will close next week after a series of heists as armed depositors attempt to withdraw their own money. So you see these people in Lebanon have had their funds, their wealth, their money, they thought was money, but it's obviously not money if it could be seized like that and frozen and kept by somebody else. They're seizing their own money because it's been frozen for a year.
Yeah, like we say, only keep money in the bank that you're willing to lose. A lot of people don't understand legally that when you put money or cash or currency into the bank, it becomes the property of the bank. And this is demonstrated in Lebanon in no uncertain terms. People don't have access to their own money because the banks in Lebanon, I'm sure, like banks all over the world, they take your money and they go speculate with it, and they lose a lot of it, and then they rely on bailouts. And when the bailouts stop, then you try to get it out, there's nothing there. So this is really a continuation, Stacy. I was thinking about this. This all started, back with Occupy Wall Street, if you recall. The movement of activism pointed at the banks, and we need to do something about the banks. Nothing was done. We keep going through these crises where the banks are acting poorly, acting badly, acting against the interests of the population. And now we're at the point where you see in Lebanon where people are saying, we're not going to protest anymore. We're going down there armed looking for our money.
Well, it brings up a number of things. First of all, it was hyperinflation, which caused this banking crisis there. So they have their own unique situation and own unique, similar to here, of a sort of post-imperial constitution imposed upon the population, whereby, three sects get to run the whole country, and they can't lose that position. They get a certain share of running, it's proof of stake, right? They have a proof of stake in the system where they get 30% of the economy, they get 30% of the political power, and corruption ensues, right? So nothing ever changes for the rest of the population. But what we've seen is that corruption has led, in a time of deglobalization and de-dollarization, to hyperinflation. They've had literal hyperinflation of the old-fashioned sort of Weimar Germany or Venezuelan or Argentinian sort of hyperinflation. That caused, of course, the central government to close down banks because you need the hard currency. The hardest fiat currency is the US dollar, so they don't want, a lot of people thought they were protecting themselves from hyperinflation by holding US dollars instead in their bank account. But of course, the central government doesn't want to lose their US dollars when you withdraw it all. So there's it's a ridiculous amount, like $50 a day or something like that, that they're allowed to even take out of their own bank account. Whether or not they have hundreds of thousands or not, they can only take $50. And so that's what you're seeing. I'll cut to a little video you can kind of see. This is the latest example of a woman who has held up this bank, and you can see it. Her name is Sally Hafiz, and she's robbing a bank of her own money. And that's a woman who has no sovereignty. She has no financial sovereignty. She has no economic sovereignty. She has no true wealth. She has no true independence because she is in this situation where she is having to resort to extreme measures in order to get what she thought was hers. And I think we're going to see this sort of action over the next years as deglobalization and de-dollarization accelerates, because a lot of people think they have certain rights, or they think they have certain wealth, or they think like their lifestyles will continue to be as easy and luxury and leisurely as it has been for the past few decades. And especially because like a lot of people, especially in the United States and the United Kingdom and Europe and Australia and New Zealand, they've really lived quite well, really lived like aristocrats over the past 2 years of getting to stay at home all day and seemingly just free money, all this proof of stake. They are the biggest economies in the world, so they have a bigger stake in this fiat system, and they get more airdrops sent to them at home. And so they feel like this is going to continue, right? Most people feel like this is the sort of state of existence that they're going to have for the next few years. And this woman in Lebanon probably thought like she had built up whatever wealth she had, and that was going to protect her and be hers to use, but she never owned that wealth.
Right. The key phrase there being hyperinflation. So the currency lost 90% of its value recently. So the purchasing power of that money trending toward zero. And this is something we know from Venezuela. The images of paper money littering the streets goes back to Weimar Germany, people burning money to keep warm. It's cheaper than trying to go out and buy firewood. And is this trend of hyperinflation going to spread globally? Well, remember Jack Dorsey recently made a big point on Twitter calling that current policies would lead to hyperinflation. And there was a lot of jawboning and chin wagging amongst the intelligentsia that he was misusing the word hyperinflation and we might have a little inflation. And of course, now we're seeing a lot of inflation, and we're seeing admission by policymakers that they believe they may have reached a point in the cycle where they simply can't stop the inflation with raising rates. Because this is only debasing the currency by dismantling the economy at a rate faster than they can print. And this is a recipe for hyperinflation. And what we're seeing in Lebanon could start a global contagion.
What we see here in El Salvador is economic liberty and economic sovereignty. And that's the opposite of what you see happening in Lebanon. Because the hyperinflation, all of the money printing you've seen from the biggest central banks in the world is theft, is confiscation. A lot of people, even if you don't have your money in a bank, Max, because you're saying like if this woman had kept her money at home, she would still have it. But still, it was being stolen every single day because she had what she thought like the dollar was safer. Certainly it is safer than the Lebanese, I think, pound. So she had her own local domestic currency was hyperinflating. The dollar, of course, stayed stronger relative to the Lebanese currency, but it could still be stolen through inflation, through money printing.
Okay.
Through the trillions.
There's no escape, except in El Salvador, they did find the escape hatch,
Yes.
as Christine Lagarde called it, and that's Bitcoin, right?
Yes. And so we're going to look at Adam Back's 2 tweets here to demonstrate to you the difference between proof of work and proof of stake. What the difference is between a gold standard, a Bitcoin standard that you have to put energy in, actually, mine the coins, mine the new wealth, that there's no quintillionaire at the top. They can't just print up new wealth randomly and capriciously and decide to bail out those people or rescue those people, let those 200 million people work from home while those other people over there have to work for a hyperinflating currency to provide the goods and services for those people working from home. None of that sort of randomness, none of that sort of inequality embedded into the system. So proof of work versus proof of stake. And we're going to show what Adam Back, cryptographer, Bitcoin OG, a lot, he was mentioned in the Bitcoin white paper, let's say that, by Satoshi Nakamoto. And he said about Bitcoin is self-sovereignty, modern free man, a positive message of hope for humanity, economic growth, power abundance paid for by private enterprise via economic incentives, separate money from state. That's proof of work, Max. That's Bitcoin, that's El Salvador. Now we're gonna look at proof of stake. That's all the rest of the world that's disintegrating. And that's certainly, of course, what you see in Lebanon. And if you're having to hold up a bank, you know you're in a proof of stake system. Let's say that. Just to get your own money, if you're having to hold up the bank just to get your own money, this is a proof of stake system. So versus proof of stake, he says, neo-feudal serfs and to digital fiefdoms ruled by pre-mine lords, digital dark ages accelerated by corporate-controlled pre-mined money. So that's proof of work, Bitcoin, versus proof of stake, which is the 22,000 other coins. But what we're highlighting here is that true independence comes through a proof of work, because obviously being a neo-feudal slave or neo-feudal serf, as he points out, is not any sort of indication of having true independence.
All right, and this topic has become a hot topic because people want Bitcoin to move from proof of work to proof of stake. And the conversation around that is really bizarre, because the proof of stake system is the system that got everybody into trouble and why people are holding up banks to get their own money back in Lebanon. Proof of work solves all those problems. Proof of work is the solution for a proof of stake system, whether it's in the altcoin market or the fiat money world system or even the gold system, that failed to work, failed to offer sovereignty to individuals. A point that was understood by El Salvador that said, you know, we're going to bestow individual sovereignty to our 7 million here in the country by making Bitcoin legal tender. And that's why El Salvador became the hope of the world. The city, the shining city on a hill is now El Salvador.
El Salvador was already that serf on somebody's coffee plantation. This is why you see the anger in the mainstream media towards El Salvador for adopting Bitcoin, because exactly what Adam Back is highlighting here, just like the elites, the sort of Elizabeth Warrens of the world, they're all celebrating Ethereum moving to proof of stake. This is a sort of CBDC, central bank digital currency world, where they get to determine who wins and loses, and they get to continue to rule the world like a serf, like Adam Back points out here. They get to maintain their digital lordship. So it's similar anger towards President Bukele and El Salvador as you see towards the FUD towards Bitcoin in general, because they don't want you to be free. And that's what, as he points out, what proof of work, what Bitcoin delivers is self-sovereignty, a positive message of hope for humanity, economic growth, power abundance provided by the private sector, not through the state, and economic incentives provide are what drives the the energy abundance, and you separate money from state. So we have that here, and that creates the fear. They want you individually and as a nation state to be that woman having to rob a bank for her own money, because that shows you who's the boss. She's the serf because she has no wealth. Only if somebody decides to release some money from their bank account that she thought was hers, but it wasn't hers. And they're showing her who's boss.
Yeah, total control. That's what they want. And that's not consistent with the enlightened ideas of life, liberty, and property.
Exactly.
Okay, so we want to hold on to those ideas because it took many hundreds of years, if not 1,000 years, to figure out that those were the enlightened ideas we wanted. We wanted to separate church and state. And now with Bitcoin, we figured out how to separate money from state. It's an evolution of the enlightened philosophy. And the people who are challenged by this are fighting back, just like the church did, fight back against those who were creating the new philosophy and political system of enshrining freedom. So now we're at that same stage again, except the players, the technology in this case is not the printing press, it's Bitcoin.
El Salvador already had proof of stake. And in a proof of stake system, there's only like 3 or 4 oligarchs or 14 families or 12 feds in the United States. Like there are only a few central banks. There are only a few oligarchs. There's a handful of oligarchs that run the world, that run each individual country, that run each state in the United States. There's a few oligarchs, and they are the proof of stake. They hold the biggest stake. They win all the rewards over and over and over. That's why you've had these developing nations developing for 100, 200 years, and they never get ahead because they are that woman in the bank. They have to rob the bank to get their own wealth because the wealth is stolen, looted, held by somebody else. But Bitcoin is, you don't have to rob the bank. You don't have to take up arms. You don't have to do that. You just need to get Bitcoin. And that shows you the power. Like, nobody at that bank in Lebanon was afraid of this woman. First of all, she had a toy gun. but secondly, they knew they could just delete her money, like, and throw her in prison. Well, if she had Bitcoin, they would be afraid of her.
Right. Well, as President Bukele said when he announced he's running for 2024, is that this is the first time, and this is also the week of independence here in El Salvador, that the country has experienced real freedom in 201 years. So this is part and parcel with the Bitcoin revolution, has met the Salvadoran revolution, and the result is a beacon that's attracting money, talent, goodwill, and as a result, the country is prospering. And people who are the colonial, neo-feudal proof of stakers don't like it.
Well, we're about to see true independence over the next decade, I think.
Right. Well, independently speaking, I will say this. We're going to take a break. And when we come back, much more coming your way.
Oh, hi, I'm Max Keiser, and this, of course, is Plucky. I got a new job. I'm now Plucky's trainer. We're doing some of these sit-ups here. He wants to get as strong as possible for the fiat money apocalypse.
That's right, Max. We're about heading into the fiat money apocalypse, and I'm stacking sats over Swan Bitcoin.
Oh, that's so smart, Plucky. How did you get so smart? Get the Swan app.
Welcome back to Max and Stacy Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Congressman William Soriano, who represents La Union, the area around the future Bitcoin city. Congressman, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Max, for having me again in your show. I'm glad to be here.
Of course you're glad to be here. This is the best show in El Salvador. It has guests like you on. And I wanted to talk to you September 15th, Independence Day, in El Salvador. President Bukele gave a speech, and in the speech, he said, yes, I'm running for 2024. But before we get to that, when the phrase Independence Day and true Independence Day is mentioned, tell us what that means to you.
All right, so in theory, our country's been an independent country for more than 201 years. But that's not true. We've not been independent from corrupt politicians, gang members who actually run this country and had it on its knees, and also corrupt political parties and all those powerful elites that have been running this country for decades. We've not been independent at all. Now that we've been actually prosecuting gang members as the Constitution allows us, and we've been changing our country, El Salvador is feeling for the first time that it's free and independent.
Right, there's the Civil War, and then that rolled into the gang war. So correct me if I have understanding this correctly. The Civil War ended up people fleeing El Salvador, and they went to the United States.
30% of our population, actually.
30% goes to mostly the U.S. They end up in prisons in the U.S., mostly in California. In that prison system, they become, as is the case so often, they become hardened criminals by being in that prison system. And that brings us up to the Clinton administration. What
Yes.
did President Clinton do?
Well, they send us back thousands of criminals that they were not criminals back when they went from El Salvador to the United States. But when they reached the ghettos of LA, they had to defend themselves, right? And they had adopted certain conducts and they became criminals. So they were sent back to El Salvador, but Salvadoran authorities didn't know they were criminals. So they were just sending thousands of gang members without us knowing that they were criminals. And that's how they came back to El Salvador, and they began recruiting members, kids, teenagers, and that's how that problem started at all. It all came back with a decision of a president from another country that affected the future and more than 30 years of our country's future. Now, we've put in jail more than 50,000 gang members in the past 5 months. And that's been a very, very important decision for El Salvador we're building right now. Crime rates. Right now, El Salvador is the safest country in Latin America. Only in the 10 years of the previous governments, the past 2 governments, right? They died more than 46,000 Salvadorans. 32,000 were disappeared due to violence. Right now, that's none of it. There's none of it. El Salvador is changing quickly, but because we have a president that's been actually taking real decisions, not the ones other governments are telling him to do, but the actual needs of its people are the ones that are driving his decisions. And taking the best decisions, well, it's for the brave ones.
Right, this brings up a couple of points. First of all, historically, there have been times, I remember in the 1970s in New York City, there was new police policies that came in. There was something called no broken windows, where no crime was tolerated whatsoever. Those who were breaking the law were rounded up and put into prison. The New York City that was bankrupt in the 1970s, they became one of the most prosperous, crime-free cities in the world.
Exactly.
Because it was decided that this was something that had to be done. The second point is those in the international community, of course, under the heading of human rights, they will have something to say about this. It seems as though, however, that there's 2 sides to the human rights question. The human rights of 7 million Salvadorans seem to get lost by these international organizations. Exactly. Can you speak on that a little bit?
All right, so I've seen a lot of NGOs talking about human rights, but human rights of the criminals. What about the victims? What about the 100% of Salvadorans that lived in this country and the rest of the people that flee the country due to gun violence? Who's actually speaking for them? Are they doing it? No. They will never do it because they don't get paid for that. And they will for sure condemn our decisions, but are they giving us any solution at all?
Can you explain something to me? When people use the word like authoritarian or dictator to describe a leader, if a poll were conducted amongst the population, most of the respondents would be against that leader.
Exactly.
Here in El Salvador, these words are used also, but over 90, I think almost even 95% of the population, when polled, have given an overwhelming positive reaction. That doesn't seem to make sense to me. What am I missing?
Well, the thing is that most of the packed media you get outside are trying to sell the idea that El Salvador's president is authoritarian, that is a dictator, right? But when you actually poll Salvadorans here and the ones living in the United States, his numbers are just crazy. I think, would you name me one president that has, on his third year of the presidency, more than 95% of approval?
No, it's
What's the approval of Joe Biden? Or what about the Mexican president?
Yeah, Joe Biden is, I think, under 35%. I think he might even be under 30%. But clearly, there seems to be an agenda by these NGOs.
You know why? Because El Salvador is setting an example to the other governments of the whole region that if they take their own decisions without listening foreign governments' indications or whatever they do, things can work. And that's not good for some of them, right?
Right. It would establish a precedent that would challenge the status quo, and
Yes.
that could be a problem if you're in the international banking business or
Exactly.
the international prison business or the international defense contract business. Let's talk about September 15th. So,
What a beautiful day.
yeah?
Yes.
Did you know the announcement was going to be made?
Well, I didn't know that.
What was your reaction when he
right.
said the words?
So it all began in the morning. I went to the parade and I could feel a different energy. Salvadorans, for the first time in decades, were able to go to the streets and feel safe and feel more patriotic than ever. You could feel it. The atmosphere was impressive. People coming from the United States, from other countries to celebrate the pride of being Salvadorans, but not only the pride of independence, but the fact that our country is changing for real. And you could feel it. At the afternoon, I had to go to the presidential house. Let's call it the White House of El Salvador, right? And I knew our president was going to deliver a message to the country and also to the international community, right? But he was giving a speech that started from our independence back in the 18,000s, right? And he explained it, all the process our country has been going through to this very young moment. At the moment he actually announced that he was running for president in 2024, the whole room just burst in joy. Everyone was in shock, but at the same time, happy. Because our people, Salvadorans, more than 95% of Salvadorans, have been actually asking him to run again. And that's the support that actually has to matter to us. And I think our president has been doing a very good job. You see, El Salvador, that was in the top of the most violent countries, it was the number one. Right now it's the safest country in the region. That's not something easy to do. That's not something you do from one day to another. But it's taken us 5 months to actually defeat the gangs and to free our country. And from now on, we're truly independent. And when people see the changes our president is doing, the way he handled the COVID and the pandemic, the economic impact it caused, and all the decisions until we land on the security issue and the way he solved it, they wanted to keep up. They want him to keep on going and making the same decisions he's doing. And it's just a matter of logic. If something's working, why would you change it?
I don't want to sound glib, but I am American, and one of the things I thought of was Tom Brady. He's an old guy, 45 years old, but give Tom the ball because Tom can score touchdowns,
Yeah,
right?
MVP, yeah.
Now, President Bukele is on a roll.
Exactly.
He's doing great things. He's a phenomenon.
Yes.
He's got 95% support. He's transforming the country, transforming the region. Let him go. Let him do
Exactly.
what he can do. Well, why not? Why would you not want this once in a 500-year phenomenon to see where he can take this country. Everything he's been doing so far has been for the people. Of course, the biggest thing where I caught my attention was making Bitcoin legal tender, which is essentially the complete opposite of what a dictator would do, because it gives everybody in the country their individual sovereignty. So they're mutually exclusive. You cannot be a dictator and make Bitcoin legal. That's a completely ridiculously that notion. So these are themes that he mentioned in the speech: peace, liberty, sovereignty, independence. These are some of the themes. So do you think that essentially talking about economic liberty, the true independence, and going forward from this point forward, what are some of the 2 or 3 ways that you think life will change here?
All right, so making Bitcoin a legal tender in El Salvador was part of the whole strategy. But first, in order to actually make it a whole success, you need to secure the country. You need to make it safer, not only for Salvadorans living here, but also for investors. And we've achieved it.
Okay, what are we seeing on the investor front? What's happening?
All right, so once we achieve security, now you can call investors and you can show them your country and tell them it's safe for you to invest here. It's a good time to actually invest your money into our country. Plus, you have another option, Bitcoiners, who can actually transform specific areas in the country. Bitcoin City, where it is going to be made in the state I represent. And I know it's going to change a lot of lives, not only for Salvadorans, but also for the whole region, because it's Honduras and Nicaragua at the same place. So I think big things are coming to El Salvador. And Salvadorans have learned that if they choose a wise, a brave, but also an honest president, our country is going to change, and it's changing. For how many years Angela Merkel was president or prime minister of Germany?
Oh, it was over 20, I believe.
Did anyone say something about it?
She kept getting the support of the people, and I believe she was reelected accordingly.
Was she condemned by the United States?
The FDR in our country, he was elected, I think, 4 times.
Was she condemned by the IMF? No. Did they say anything about it? No. So why the first world countries can choose and make their own paths?
Right. Well, you're touching on this idea of the run in 2024. This would seem to go up against looking at the Constitution and understanding what are the provisions for this.
Well, the Constitution and the Supreme Court has already established that he can run for another term. So who's the one who interprets the Constitution? The Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court has ruled that he can actually run for another term. Well, there's nothing else to do.
Right. So to your point, and I think what people are focusing on is that, and this point was made during the speech, dozens and dozens of countries allow for 2 terms in office. The one term,
I can name you some of them.
Right. Well, the one-term rule, from my understanding of history, was really imposed by outsiders to make it easier to control a country like El Salvador.
Exactly.
And so now, in the current historical inflection point, El Salvador would like to break free and be independent and sovereign. And to do that, the amount of work that needs to be done is going to take more than a few years. And we've got a guy who's in the president's office who's doing a great job. So why wouldn't the people of El Salvador have the same benefit as the people of the United States or countries around the world, where if you like what the guy's doing, you can elect him again? I mean, it seems pretty simple.
Exactly, and the numbers and the polls are saying that he's the best option for our country.
Right, and I think this idea of self-sovereignty for the people is being pushed very hard by the leadership in this country. So any fears that people have on the outside that are mitigated by the fact, again, but that Bitcoin is legal tender. That's how I see it. But what do you? The momentum is so fantastic, and the kind of I know you're on the road now speaking more and more to the diaspora in the United States. What's been the response? I saw you in Los Angeles.
It's impressive.
And I thought it was the second coming of Cary Grant or some major movie star or something. I mean, they were lining up You were like
Yes.
the Brad Pitt of El Salvador. What's happening? What was that what's true? Or was that all,
Well,
what's happening?
They make you feel like you're in El Salvador, but in another country. It's just impressive the amount of energy and the fact that people want to be part of the changes that our country is actually leaving. It's just amazing. It moves you. It gives you the security that you're going through the right path. I've been traveling to LA, to Washington, Virginia, Houston, Miami, and many other states. And every time I get there, there's thousands of Salvadorans waiting for us. First, so they can hear the great news we're doing of the work we're doing here, but also they want to be part of it.
Right.
You can hear stories from people that haven't lived in El Salvador for more than 40 years because they felt unsafe. And they want to come back now and they want to invest their savings here.
You know, when we're having the experience is that this happened twice. People have come to us and said they're moving back to El Salvador
Yeah.
from the United States, and they're starting businesses. And one is into an ice business, a craft ice
Oh, yeah.
business, right? Who's doing very, very well. And I said, well, okay, El Salvador is doing great. You wanted to move back. He said, that's part of it. The other part of it is that you two gringos, Max and Stacy, are having so much fun in my country. I got jealous.
Well, that's true. I mean, they've seen your example, they've seen your stories, your videos, the life you're living here. That has been just amazing. And it makes everyone jealous, actually.
Yeah, they're like, oh, wait, I'm Salvadoran. Why am I stuck in Detroit?
Yes,
I
I know.
could be in San Salvador.
And food in El Salvador is great. People in El Salvador is great. Weather in El Salvador is great. The
Yeah.
beach, the mountain, the volcanoes, coffee.
When does the
Well,
rainy
everything is
season
good here.
end? Because quite frankly, I'm getting tired of it.
Well, it's done.
What?
It's done.
It's done?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll
So
take your word
You're
for
getting
it.
much sun right now.
Because I gotta go back to El Zante, work on my surfing.
Go ahead.
Stacy was up the first time surfing, natural.
Wow.
You know, it took me like I was unable to get up.
Is she good?
Well, she got up and she could do it. I was unable to do it at all. So
Well,
I have to.
You know, surfing in El Salvador, we have a few of the very few spots worldwide that have a very specific type of waves. And that makes us a unique destination for surfing. And we've been having world championships here and world renowned tournaments. And it's just, El Salvador is changing the image the foreign media has been portraying of us for decades.
Yeah, tourism is up like 80%.
And there's a lot to do with Bitcoin.
Right.
There's a lot of Bitcoiners that will never come to this country without having the capacity of actually paying with Bitcoins in anywhere in El Salvador. And that's part of the strategy to change El Salvador's image worldwide. And it's working.
In the assembly where you work,
Yeah.
you know, anyone who watches political TV will see you working in the assembly, working hard. What is the chatter in the assembly about Bitcoin? In other words, you're a Bitcoiner, you're in the assembly. So what's it like there, people talking about it? Can you give us some
I know some
insight?
colleagues, myself as well, we have Bitcoin, right? We stack them, we hold them. But most of them, they tell you stories about people that will never been able to actually receive payments peer-to-peer. It would only be cash. And they will lose many opportunities to actually get clients. But right now, most of them who are actually able to receive payments on their wallet, they are having more clients that would never had before. And that's very important for local economies, that they become part of the world economy.
And regional, right? So Central
Exactly.
American, Honduras, Guatemala, all these
Yes.
countries, a lot more inter-regional trade as well with Bitcoin.
It's changing. You see a lot of Guatemalans coming to El Salvador to see what's going on with Bitcoin. People from Honduras, from Colombia as well. They want to know what's happening here. I've been giving some speeches to other congresses, and specifically for whole Central America. Also, I've been giving speeches in Germany, Colombia, the United States. People want to know about El Salvador's experience with the Bitcoin, and I believe that we're just building something that's never been seen in the world. We're just giving them something that's gonna help other countries in developing to actually mark their own path. That's what we're trying to do. El Salvador is just giving them options to become better.
I don't understand why these other countries feel the need to interfere.
Well, you know why? Because they have interests, and they don't want to lose their influence on the decisions we take.
But if they take away the ability to interfere with your money, for example, the US sanctions other countries by sanctioning the SWIFT system or by
Yeah.
seizing money. If you take away that tool because
Use
everyone has
blockchain.
Bitcoin, how are they going to influence you?
Yeah, we use blockchain, so there's no way that it can influence us.
So you're immune from this outside
Well,
interference.
we're just sovereign.
You're sovereign,
Yeah,
sovereign and happy.
yes.
And
and
everyone else,
independent.
come on down for the surfing and the papooses.
Yeah, I mean, just as other countries are, they're independent and sovereign, but we were just independent. Right now, we're sovereign, free, and independent, and happy.
Well, I'm feeling it. I live here. I moved here. I feel sovereign and free and happy too, and I'm going to learn to surf. Mark my words. William Soriano, thanks so much for being on Max and Stacy Report.
Thank you, Max, Stacy, for having me here. It's just always great to see you guys. Now that you live here in El Salvador, it just makes me feel way better that you're actually living El Salvador the way it should be lived.
Right on. All right, well, that's going to do it for this edition of Max and Stacy Report. And coming to you from El Salvador, land of the free, home of the Bitcoin.
Yes.
Want to thank our special guest, William Soriano. Until next time, bye, y'all.